The old house on Blackwood Lane ****. The rain poured relentlessly as Emily's car crawled up the muddy path of Blackwood Lane. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. She hadn't seen her Aunt Margaret in over a decade, but the lawyer's letter had been clear. ***, you are the sole heir to Margaret Blackwood's estate, including the house on Blackwood Lane. ***. The house came into view, a decaying Victorian mansion with shattered windows and a sagging roof. Emily's heart sank. This was her inheritance? She parked the car and stepped out, the cold rain soaking her instantly. The key the lawyer had sent fit perfectly into the rusted lock, and the door creaked open with a sound that sent shivers down her spine. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic. Emily flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. She pulled out her phone, the flashlight illuminating the dusty foyer. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their eyes seeming to follow her as she moved. The living room was draped in white sheets, the furniture ghostly silhouettes in the dim light. A grand staircase led to the upper floors, its banister carved with intricate, unsettling designs. Emily set her suitcase down and called out, "Hello." Her voice echoed through the empty house, but there was no reply. As the storm raged outside, Emily lit a few candles and settled on the couch. The house groaned and creaked, the wind howling through the cracks. She tried to convince herself it was just the old wood settling, but then she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the storm. "Hello," she called again, her voice trembling. The whispering stopped, but the air grew colder. She grabbed a candle and climbed the stairs, following the sound to a closed door at the end of the hallway. The whispering grew louder as she approached. It sounded like her name. "Emily." She pushed the door open, revealing an empty room with a rocking chair in the corner. The chair was moving slowly, as if someone had just been sitting in it. Emily slammed the door shut and ran back downstairs, her heart pounding. She spent the rest of the night on the couch, clutching a knife from the kitchen, too afraid to sleep. The next morning, the storm had passed. Emily explored the backyard and found a shed with a trapdoor. Inside, she discovered a hidden chamber filled with jars of strange objects and a leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to her aunt, and the entries spoke of whispers, shadowy figures, and a growing presence in the house. The final entry read, ***, it's here. It's watching me. If you're reading this, Emily, leave this place. Don't let it find you. ***. Emily's hands shook as she closed the journal. She didn't know what her aunt had been talking about, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone in the house. The shadow in the mirror ***. Emily spent the day cleaning the house, trying to distract herself from the journal's ominous warning. She told herself it was just her aunt's paranoia. Maybe Margaret had been ill, or lonely, or both. But as the sun dipped below the trees, the house seemed to come alive with strange noises. Footsteps echoed in empty rooms, and the whispering returned, louder this time. She decided to investigate the attic. The narrow staircase creaked under her weight, and the air grew colder with each step. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, trunks, and boxes. A large, dusty mirror stood in the corner, its surface cracked and fogged. As Emily rummaged through a trunk, she caught movement in the mirror out of the corner of her eye. She turned, but the reflection wasn't hers. A shadowy figure stood behind her, its features blurred and shifting. She spun around, but the attic was empty. Her heart raced as she backed away from the mirror. The whispering grew louder, filling the room. "Emily, stay with us." She bolted down the stairs, slamming the attic door shut behind her. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the silence oppressive. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard a soft knock at her door. ***tap. Tap. Tap. ***. Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. No answer. The knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. She grabbed the knife from her nightstand and crept to the door, flinging it open. The hallway was empty. But as she turned to close the door, she saw it. A shadowy figure at the end of the hall, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It vanished before she could react. Emily spent the rest of the night in the living room, the candles burning low. She didn't know what was in the house, but she knew one thing. It wasn't going to let her leave. The locked room ***. The next morning, Emily woke up on the couch, stiff and exhausted. The candles had burned out, and the house was eerily silent. She decided to search for answers, starting with the locked room on the second floor. She had noticed it the day before, a heavy wooden door with a rusted padlock. She found a set of old keys in the kitchen drawer and tried each one until the lock clicked open. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a small, windowless room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like dried blood. In the center of the room was a chair, its legs bolted to the floor, and a table covered in dusty tools. Emily's stomach churned as she realized what she was looking at. This wasn't just a room, it was a ritual space. She picked up a piece of paper from the table, its edges brittle with age. The handwriting was her aunt's, but the words made no sense. Asterisk, the shadow demands a sacrifice. It feeds on fear. It will not stop until it has consumed everything. Asterisk. As she read, the temperature in the room dropped. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and the symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly. The whispering started again, louder and more urgent. Emily, join us. She dropped the paper and backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. Her mind raced. What had her aunt done? And what was the shadow? That afternoon, Emily decided to visit the local library. The town was small, and the librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Green, recognized the Blackwood name immediately. Margaret Blackwood? Mrs. Green said, her voice hushed. That house, it has a history. People say it's cursed. Your aunt, she was obsessed with something dark. Something she couldn't control. Emily's hands trembled as she listened. What happened to her? Mrs. Green leaned in closer, her eyes wide. No one knows for sure. But they found her in that house. She was gone long before they reached her. The town's secret asterisk. Emily left the library with a heavy heart and a stack of old newspapers. Mrs. Green had warned her not to dig too deep, but she couldn't stop now. She needed answers. Back at the house, she spread the newspapers on the dusty dining table and began to read. The articles were decades old, their ink faded and yellowed. They spoke of disappearances, strange occurrences, and a series of tragedies linked to the Blackwood family. One headline caught her eye. Asterisk, local woman claims house is haunted by shadow entity. Asterisk, the article described a woman who had lived in the house before Margaret. She claimed to have seen a shadowy figure that whispered to her at night. A week later, she was found dead in the locked room. Emily's hands shook as she read. The journal, the symbols, the whispers, it all made sense now. The shadow wasn't just a figment of her aunt's imagination. It was real, and it had been feeding on the fear of everyone who lived in the house. As the sun set, the house grew darker, and the whispers returned. This time, they were louder, more insistent. Emily, you can't escape. She lit every candle she could find, but the shadows seemed to close in around her. That night, Emily dreamed of the locked room. She was sitting in the chair, the symbols glowing on the walls. The shadow stood before her, its form shifting and twisting. It reached out, its cold fingers brushing against her skin. You belong to us now, it whispered. Emily woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The candles had burned out, and the house was pitch black. She fumbled for her phone, but the battery was dead. The whispers surrounded her, coming from every direction. Leave me alone, she shouted, her voice breaking. But the shadow was already there, standing at the foot of her bed. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its voice echoed in her mind. Asterisk. The ritual asterisk. Emily woke up gasping for air, her heart pounding in her chest. The shadow was gone, but the whispers lingered, echoing in her mind. She knew she couldn't stay in the house any longer. But as she grabbed her suitcase and headed for the door, it slammed shut on its own. The locks clicked into place, and no matter how hard she pulled, the door wouldn't budge. Panic set in as she realized she was trapped. The whispers grew louder, filling the house with an eerie chorus. You can't leave, you're ours. Desperate, Emily ran to the kitchen and grabbed a flashlight. She needed to find a way out. That's when she remembered the journal. Maybe it held the key to breaking free from the shadow's grip. She flipped through the pages, her hands trembling, until she found an entry that made her blood run cold. Asterisk, the only way to banish the shadow is through a ritual. But it requires a sacrifice. Someone must take its place. Asterisk. Emily's mind raced. A sacrifice? Was that what her aunt had tried to do? She read further, her heart sinking. The ritual required lighting 7 candles in the shape of a circle, reciting an incantation, and offering something of great personal value. But the warning was clear. Asterisk, if the ritual fails, the shadow will claim you forever. Asterisk. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Emily, join us." She knew she had no choice. She gathered the candles and arranged them in a circle in the living room. As she lit each one, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around her. With the journal in hand, she began to recite the incantation. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. The whispers turned into screams, the shadows twisting and writhing around her. The house shook, the walls cracking as the shadow fought to stop her. As she reached the final line of the incantation, she held up her mother's locket, the only thing she had left of her family. "I offer this," she said, her voice steady. "Take it and leave me alone." The room fell silent. The candles flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. For a moment, she thought it had worked. But then she felt it, a cold hand on her shoulder. The shadow's voice echoed in her mind, softer now, almost gentle. Asterisk, "You are strong, but not strong enough." Asterisk. The sacrifice asterisk asterisk. Emily froze as the shadow's icy grip tightened on her shoulder. The whispers returned, softer now, almost soothing. Asterisk, "You cannot escape, but you can join us. Become one with the shadows, and you will never be alone again." Asterisk. Her mind raced. The ritual had failed. The shadow was too powerful. But then she remembered something her aunt had written in the journal. Asterisk, "The shadow feeds on fear. To defeat it, you must let go of your fear." Asterisk. Emily took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She focused on the memories of her mother, her laughter, her warmth, the way she used to sing Emily to sleep. The shadow's grip loosened, and the whispers grew faint. "I'm not afraid of you," Emily said, her voice steady. "You have no power over me." The room fell silent. The candles flickered back to life, their light pushing the shadows into the corners. The shadow's form began to dissolve, its glowing eyes fading into nothingness. "You are strong," it whispered one last time before vanishing completely. Emily collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The house felt different now, lighter, quieter. She knew the shadow was gone for good. But as she looked at her mother's locket, now tarnished and cracked, she realized the cost of her victory. She spent the next few days cleaning the house, removing the symbols from the walls and burning the journal. The whispers were gone, but the memories lingered. She knew she could never live in the house again. As she drove away from Blackwood Lane for the last time, Emily glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadowy figure standing in the driveway, watching her leave. But when she looked again, it was gone. The return asterisk asterisk. Emily thought she had left the shadow behind. She moved to a small apartment in the city, far from Blackwood Lane. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night, she dreamed of the house, the whispers, the locked room, the shadow's glowing eyes. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart racing. One evening, as she was unpacking a box, she found something that made her blood run cold. It was her mother's locket, the one she had offered during the ritual. But it wasn't tarnished and cracked anymore. It was shiny and new, as if it had never been touched. Emily's hands trembled as she opened the locket. Inside was a small piece of paper, folded neatly. She unfolded it and read the words written in her aunt's handwriting. Asterisk, "The shadow never leaves. It only waits." Asterisk. That night, the whispers returned. They were faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the city outside. But as the hours passed, they grew louder, more insistent. "Emily, you can't escape." She tried to ignore them, burying herself under the blankets. But then she felt it, a cold hand on her shoulder. She turned around, but the room was empty. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind. "You belong to us." Emily knew what she had to do. She grabbed her keys and drove back to Blackwood Lane. The house was just as she had left it, dark, decaying, and filled with secrets. She walked inside, the door creaking shut behind her. Awesome! Here's part 8 with more suspense and a deeper twist. The final confrontation asterisk asterisk. The house was colder than Emily remembered. The air was heavy, and the whispers were louder now, echoing through the empty halls. She walked straight to the locked room, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, as if they had been waiting for her return. Emily set the locket on the table and lit the 7 candles again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She recited the incantation, her voice strong and clear. The house shook, the walls groaning as the shadow fought back. But Emily didn't stop. She held up the locket and said, "I offer this. Take it and leave me alone." The room fell silent. The candles flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. For a moment, she thought it had worked. But then she felt it, a cold hand on her shoulder. The shadow's voice echoed in her mind, softer now, almost gentle. Asterisk, you are strong, but not strong enough. Asterisk. Emily woke up in the locked room, the candles burning low. The locket was gone, and the symbols on the walls were glowing brighter than ever. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way. The shadow stood before her, its form shifting and twisting. You belong to us now, it whispered. But Emily wasn't afraid anymore. She smiled and said, I know what you are. You're not a shadow. You're a part of me. The shadow hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing. Asterisk, what are you talking about? Asterisk. Emily stood up, her voice steady. You're my fear, my guilt, my pain, and I'm not running from you anymore. The shadow began to dissolve, its form fading into nothingness. The whispers stopped, and the room fell silent. The candles flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. Got it. Here's part 9 with a climactic twist. The truth ***. Emily stood in the darkness, her heart pounding. The shadow was gone, but something felt off. The air was still heavy, and the house seemed to hum with a strange energy. She stumbled out of the locked room and into the hallway, her flashlight flickering. As she made her way downstairs, she noticed something she hadn't before, a small door hidden beneath the staircase. It was barely visible, its edges blending into the woodwork. She pulled it open, revealing a narrow passage leading downward. The passage was damp and cold, the walls lined with more of the strange symbols. At the end was a small chamber, lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it sat an old leather-bound book. Emily recognized it immediately. It was another journal, but this one was older, its pages yellowed and brittle. She opened it and began to read. The entries were written in a shaky hand, the ink faded with time. They spoke of a ritual gone wrong, of a shadow that had been summoned but could not be controlled. The final entry made her blood run cold. Asterisk, the shadow is not a spirit. It is a manifestation of the darkest parts of ourselves. It feeds on fear, guilt, and pain. To destroy it, one must confront their own darkness. But beware, if you fail, the shadow will consume you, and you will become its vessel. Asterisk. Emily's hands trembled as she closed the journal. She realized now that the shadow wasn't just a part of her. It was a part of everyone who had lived in the house. Her aunt, the woman before her, and now her. The shadow had been passed down, growing stronger with each new host. Here's part 10, the final part of the story, wrapping everything up with a chilling conclusion. The end, or the beginning? ***. Emily stood in the chamber, the journal clutched in her hands. The truth was clear now. The shadow wasn't just a curse on the house. It was a curse on her. It had been feeding on her fear, her guilt, her pain. And if she didn't end it now, it would consume her completely. She returned to the locked room, the journal tucked under her arm. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, as if they were alive. She lit the 7 candles again and placed the journal on the table. This time, she didn't recite the incantation. Instead, she spoke from her heart. I'm not afraid of you anymore, she said, her voice steady. You're a part of me, but you don't control me. I let go of my fear. I let go of my guilt. I let go of my pain. And I let go of you. The room fell silent. The candles flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the symbols on the walls began to fade, their glow dimming until they disappeared completely. The air grew lighter, and the whispers stopped. Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew the shadow was gone, not just from the house, but from her. She walked out of the room and down the stairs, the house feeling different now. It was just a house, no longer a prison. As she drove away from Blackwood Lane for the last time, Emily glanced in the rearview mirror. The house stood silent and still, its windows dark. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. But as she turned onto the main road, she noticed something strange. The journal was still on the passenger seat, its pages open to the final entry. The words seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, and as she looked closer, she realized they had changed. Asterisk, the shadow is gone, but it is never truly defeated. It waits, patient and silent, for the next soul to call it home. Asterisk. Emily's smile faded. She closed the journal and tossed it into the back seat, trying to shake off the unease. But as she drove, she couldn't help but feel like she was being watched. and in the distance, the shadowy figure stood at the edge of the forest, its glowing eyes fixed on her car as it disappeared down the road. The end. I hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know if you'd like more tales like this. Smiling face with smiling eyes. The wind howled through the small, sleepy town of Ravenswood, carrying with it the scent of decay and forgotten memories. It was a place where the fog never seemed to lift, where the sun barely managed to break through the thick, oppressive clouds. The townspeople kept to themselves, speaking in hushed tones when it came to the old mansion on the outskirts. It was said that the house had been abandoned for over 30 years, ever since the brutal murders of the Green family, who had lived there for generations. Locals whispered that the mansion was cursed, that it was alive with spirits, and that anyone who dared to enter would never leave the same. But this did little to dissuade a group of adventurous friends, Nazhit, Zane, Lara, and Sanaa. They were determined to uncover the truth, to break through the fear and the superstition that had plagued the town for decades. Lara, the most skeptical of the group, was the first to speak. "I don't believe in ghosts or curses. This is just a stupid story, and we're going to prove it." Zane, always the brave one, nodded. "Exactly. Let's go in, explore, and come back to tell everyone the truth. It's just an old house, nothing more." Sanaa, more cautious, looked at the mansion from a distance. It loomed large against the dark sky, its broken windows and sagging roof giving it an almost menacing appearance. She swallowed nervously but followed her friends without protest. The fear was there, but so was the thrill of the unknown. Nazhit, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "You guys know about the Green family, right? Their deaths were violent. People say they saw shadows moving in the windows right before they were killed. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but I don't know." Lara rolled her eyes. "Come on, Nazhit. We're not going to get anywhere if we let a few rumors scare us. Let's get inside and see what all the fuss is about." As the group made their way through the overgrown path that led to the mansion, the air grew colder. Each step they took seemed to echo louder, the crunch of their footsteps disturbing the eerie silence. The mansion's towering structure seemed to reach out at them, its dark windows staring down like empty eyes. They reached the front door, which was ajar, creaking with every gust of wind. Zane pushed it open with ease, the hinges groaning as if the house was waking from a long slumber. The darkness inside was impenetrable, and for a moment they hesitated. But curiosity and the need to prove their bravery pushed them forward. The air inside the mansion was thick with dust, the smell of rot and mildew suffocating. The walls, once grand, were now peeling and cracked, and the floorboards groaned under their weight. The place felt abandoned, but something about it was wrong. It was as if the house itself was waiting for them. As they ventured deeper into the mansion, they came across remnants of the Green family's life, torn photographs, broken furniture, and faded memories that spoke of a time before the tragedy. A sudden chill swept over them, making their skin prickle. Nazhit stopped at a large portrait hanging on the wall. The painting was of a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, smiling, their eyes filled with life. But something about the faces seemed off. The eyes of the man and woman were too dark, too hollow, as if they were hiding something. "This must be the Green family," Nazhit murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Lara, who had been exploring further into the room, turned back toward the group. "Let's not waste time on old pictures. We came here to find out what really happened." As they continued through the mansion, they heard strange noises, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric in the air, a distant whisper. Each of them brushed it off as the house settling, but deep down, they couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. They reached the back of the house, where a grand staircase led to the second floor. The stairs were cracked and unstable, but it was the only way forward. One by one, they carefully ascended, the darkness of the upper floor swallowing them whole. The second floor was colder than the first, and the silence was almost deafening. As they walked down the narrow hallway, they came upon a door at the end, slightly ajar. A faint light flickered from inside, and despite every instinct telling them to turn back, they pushed the door open. Inside was a large room, its centerpiece a blood-stained mirror. It was unlike any mirror they had seen before. The glass was warped, cracked in places, and the frame was intricately carved with symbols they couldn't recognize. But what struck them most was the reflection in the mirror. It wasn't their own. The image that stared back at them was twisted, a grotesque version of themselves, their faces distorted with fear, pain, and death. The reflection flickered, like a shadow moving in the glass. Zane stepped forward, his heart pounding. "What the hell?" Before anyone could respond, the room seemed to shift. The air became thick, suffocating, and the temperature dropped even further. The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. The mirror seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if it were alive. It beckoned them, drawing them closer, pulling them in with its dark, hypnotic power. As the shadows in the mirror grew larger, they realized the truth. They had come to the house looking for answers, but now they were part of the story. The curse of Ravenswood had them in its grip, and there would be no escape. The mansion's secret. The room was suffocating. The once silent mansion now seemed alive with a haunting presence that hovered in the air. The group, shaken but still determined, stood frozen, staring at the mirror. Each of them saw a twisted reflection, a grotesque image of their worst fears. The feeling of being trapped was suffocating, as if the house itself had a mind, an evil, malevolent mind, that was toying with them. Lara was the first to break the silence. Her voice was shaky but defiant. "This isn't real. It can't be. It's just a stupid trick." Her words were empty, even to herself. The reflection staring back at her was unmistakable, a distorted version of her, eyes hollow and filled with dread. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the mirror, unable to shake the feeling that something inside it was watching her, waiting. "We need to leave," Nazhit said, his voice tight with panic. He turned toward the door, but it wouldn't open. No matter how hard he pushed, the wooden door remained firmly shut. The others tried too, but it was no use. The mansion had locked them in. "Why won't it open?" Sana whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening to us?" Zane, the most composed of the group, stepped toward the mirror, staring at the reflection. This is not normal." He reached out, his hand hovering near the glass. The air around the mirror grew colder, and just as he touched the surface, a sharp, unnatural chill raced up his arm. Suddenly, the mirror rippled, distorting Zane's reflection as if something was moving within it. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing outward from where his hand had made contact. A voice echoed from within the mirror, low, guttural, and filled with an unsettling hunger. "Leave this place, or become part of it." Zane stumbled back, heart pounding in his chest. "We need to find another way out. This thing, it's alive." Lara, still shaken but trying to keep her cool, scanned the room. There had to be something, anything, that could explain this nightmare. Her eyes landed on an old, dusty journal lying in the corner. It looked out of place, as if someone had hastily discarded it. "I'm going to look at this," she said, kneeling down to pick it up. The others gathered around as she flipped through the fragile pages. The handwriting inside was shaky, almost desperate, filled with frantic notes and symbols. The journal belonged to someone named Elizabeth Green, the last surviving member of the Green family. The entries were chaotic, filled with references to dark rituals and an ancient curse that had plagued the family for generations. Each page described how the family had been drawn into a deadly pact with a spirit that lived within the mansion. "They were trying to summon something," Lara read aloud. "Something that was never meant to be summoned. The mirror, it's the key." She paused, feeling a chill settle over her as the words began to sink in. The journal described the spirit trapped within the mirror, an entity that fed off fear, torment, and pain. It could never leave the mansion, but it could trap anyone who came near, turning them into part of the cursed house. "They made a mistake," Lara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Green family, they tried to break the curse, but they were all killed, trapped inside." A loud bang echoed through the house, and the mirror cracked again, the darkness within it shifting. They all froze. The house was alive. This was no ordinary haunting. "We need to find a way out," Zane urged, his eyes wide with fear. "We can't stay here any longer." But as he turned toward the door, the walls seemed to close in. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the house itself were growing angry at their intrusion. The mansion had been waiting for them, and it wasn't going to let them leave. Nazhit grabbed the journal from Lara's hands, flipping through the pages furiously. "There's got to be a way to break this," he muttered. "A way to get out." At the very back of the journal, there was one last entry. It was smeared with ink, almost illegible, but the words stood out clearly. "Only blood can free you. Only the blood of the guilty." The words echoed in the room, their meaning heavy and ominous. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the curse sinking in. The mansion was hungry. It wasn't just after them, it was after their souls. Suddenly, the mirror began to glow, a faint red light emanating from the cracks. The reflection of the group twisted again, but this time, it was different. Their faces were no longer distorted. They were in pain. Terrified. They were pleading with them. "Help us." The voice was clear now, clearer than before, and it seemed to come from within the mirror itself. The group took a collective step back, hearts racing, unable to comprehend what they were seeing or hearing. Was it the Green family? Were they trapped inside the mirror, just like the journal had suggested? Lara was the first to break the silence. "We have to get out of here now. There's no other choice. We need to leave the mansion. We need to." But the words died in her throat as the mirror seemed to pulse with energy. The room grew darker, colder, and the once stagnant air was now filled with the sound of whispers. Faint at first, but growing louder, until they became a cacophony of screams and cries. The mirror seemed to reach out to them, its reflection not just showing them, but pulling them closer. "Get away from it," Nazhit shouted, trying to pull Lara back, but the house was now fighting them. The floor beneath them seemed to crack and shift, as if it wanted to swallow them whole. They were trapped, no longer just in the mansion, but in its curse, its history, its nightmares. They had opened a door that should have remained closed. As the mirror grew more powerful, the friends realized the terrible truth. The mansion didn't want them to leave. It wanted them to stay, to become part of its eternal nightmare. And if they couldn't break the curse, if they couldn't find a way to escape, they would be lost forever. The blood sacrifice. The air was suffocating, thick with a sense of dread that clung to their skin. They could hear it now, the whispers low and constant, a chorus of voices trapped within the walls of the mansion. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing with them, feeding off their fear. Lara's heart hammered in her chest as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The mirror, the reflection, the voices. It was all too much, too overwhelming to comprehend. She could still feel the presence, that dark force, lingering in the corners of her mind. "We need to get out," she said, her voice trembling, her words barely a whisper. But even as she spoke, a cold shiver ran down her spine, and she knew, deep down, that escape wasn't an option anymore. Zane, who had been silently observing the mirror, stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with fear. It's like it's calling us, pulling us in." The mirror still pulsed with that eerie red glow, its surface rippling as if something was trying to break through. The reflection was no longer a twisted image of them. Now it was an image of the mansion itself, dark, decaying, and alive with a terrible hunger. "This isn't just a haunting," Nazhit said, his voice shaky as he glanced around the room, desperate to find something, anything, that could offer a way out. "This place, it's a prison. And we're the prisoners." The sound of scraping, like nails on a chalkboard, echoed through the walls. It was a low, agonizing sound, and it seemed to grow louder as the minutes passed. "We need to find the source of the curse," Lara insisted, her voice gaining strength despite the terror that clung to her words. "There has to be something. Some way to stop this." The journal, the one they had found earlier, was still clutched in Lara's hands. She flipped through it again, her eyes scanning the frantic, ink-stained pages. The words that she had read before began to take on new meaning. The Green family had summoned something terrible, and now it was after them. But the journal also hinted at a way to stop it, a way to break the curse. "There's a ritual," she muttered, reading aloud from the pages. "A blood sacrifice. It says, 'Only the blood of the guilty can break the curse.'" The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her, their faces filled with confusion and fear. "The blood of the guilty?" Zane asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Lara replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But the journal says it's the only way to stop this. We have to find the source of the curse, and we have to perform the ritual. Or we'll never escape." Sanaa, who had been eerily quiet, suddenly spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "But who is guilty? Whose blood do we offer?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The house seemed to pulse, the walls groaning under the weight of its dark secret. The answer to their question was hidden somewhere in the mansion, buried deep beneath the layers of decay and madness. "Let's split up," Zane suggested, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. "We'll search the mansion. There has to be something, some clue that will lead us to the truth." Reluctantly, the group agreed. They couldn't stay in one place. They had to find the source of the curse, or they would be trapped here forever. The search for answers. Lara, Zane, Nazhit, and Sanaa spread out, each heading in a different direction. The mansion was vast, its corridors winding and twisting, as if designed to confuse and disorient anyone who dared to enter. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of rot clung to everything. It was as if the house itself was decaying slowly, relentlessly. Lara made her way down a narrow hallway, her footsteps echoing off the walls. The house seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, a presence that watched her every move. She could hear the whispers again, growing louder, more insistent. She shook her head, trying to block out the voices, but they kept coming, urgent, pleading, angry. "Help us, get out," the whispers echoed. She rounded a corner and froze. At the end of the hallway stood a door. It was different from the others, older, weathered, as if it hadn't been touched in years. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the door the journal had spoken of. The one that would lead her to the truth. With trembling hands, she reached out and opened the door. Inside, the room was dark, but she could make out the shape of a large, wooden chest in the center. The whispers were louder now, swirling around her, filling her ears. She stepped inside, her breath shallow, and walked toward the chest. As she approached, she felt the temperature drop, a cold, clammy chill settling over her. The chest was covered in strange symbols, etched into the wood, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. It was ancient, old beyond measure, and yet it seemed to pulse with life. Lara hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. Was this it? Was this the source of the curse? She reached for the chest's lid and slowly lifted it. Inside, she found what she had been searching for, a collection of bones, arranged in a pattern, their sharp edges glinting in the faint light. And at the center of the bones was a small, blood-stained knife. The revelation. Meanwhile, Nazhit and Zane were exploring another part of the mansion. They had come across an old library, its shelves crammed with dusty books and journals. Zane pulled one of the books off the shelf, his fingers trembling as he flipped through the pages. "It's all here," Zane muttered. "The curse. The ritual. The blood sacrifice." Nazhit looked over his shoulder, his face pale. "What does it say? How do we stop this?" Zane's eyes widened as he read aloud. "The curse can only be broken if one of the bloodline of the Green family offers their life in sacrifice. But the one who sacrifices themselves must be guilty, must carry the burden of the sins committed by the family." The realization hit them like a thunderclap. The Green family had been cursed for generations. But who among them was guilty? Who could offer their life to end the curse? And who would be the one to make the ultimate sacrifice? The choice. The group reunited in the main hall, the weight of the truth hanging heavily over them. The journal, the book, and the chilling revelation about the blood sacrifice were all they had. They had found the source of the curse, the Green family's sins, and the only way out was a sacrifice. But who was guilty? Who would give up their life to break the curse? They stood there, silence enveloping them, as the house seemed to close in around them. The whispers were louder now, demanding their attention, begging them to make a choice. The blood of the guilty was the price for freedom, and one of them would have to pay it. The final choice. The mansion had become a prison of the mind, the walls closing in tighter with each passing moment. Lara, Zane, Nazhit, and Sanaa stood together in the dimly lit main hall, their faces pale with fear, their hearts heavy with the burden of the truth. The journal, the book in the library, and the chilling knowledge they had uncovered pointed to one inevitable conclusion. A blood sacrifice was required to end the curse. But what they didn't understand was the cost, the true weight of what was being asked. One of them would have to die. And the price wasn't just their life, it was their soul. The air in the room was thick with tension, the silence almost suffocating. Every breath they took felt like it could be their last. They had already faced unimaginable horrors, but this was different. This was a choice that would tear them apart. Lara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the mansion itself was alive, observing their every move. The mirror, the whispers, the strange symbols, it was all part of something much darker, much more ancient than they could ever have imagined. "We can't just leave," Lara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We know the truth now. We can't ignore it. The curse, it's real." Zane looked at her, his face lined with fear and disbelief. "But one of us has to die. How can we make that choice? How do we know who is guilty?" Nazhit stepped forward, his expression grim. "It doesn't matter who's guilty. We've all been a part of this. We've all crossed a line just by stepping into this place. The curse doesn't care about innocence or guilt. It just wants blood." Sanaa's eyes were wide, her body trembling as she clutched the journal to her chest. "But we don't know who the bloodline is. Who among us has the family's blood? What if we choose wrong? What if the wrong person dies? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The truth was none of them knew. The journal spoke of the bloodline but didn't say who among them carried it. They had no way of knowing which one of them was truly guilty. Was it Zane, who had suggested they explore the mansion in the first place? Was it Lara, who had insisted on going deeper into its heart? Was it Nazhit, who had been the first to touch the cursed objects? Or was it Sanaa, who had stayed silent all this time, hiding secrets of her own? It didn't matter. The curse didn't care. The deception. The mansion seemed to pulse around them, as if it were reacting to their fear, feeding off it. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. Lara felt her skin crawl as the voices surrounded her, pushing her closer to the edge of madness. There's only one way out, the whispers hissed. One will live, one will die. Sanaa looked around, her eyes filled with a growing sense of panic. We're running out of time, she whispered, her voice cracking. The mansion, it won't let us leave until the sacrifice is made. Zane clenched his fists, his knuckles white with the tension. We can't let this happen. We can't just pick one of us. We have to find another way. But deep down, they all knew the truth. There was no other way. The mansion had already chosen. The curse was unyielding, and it would not release them unless the sacrifice was made. Lara walked slowly to the center of the room, her eyes scanning the faces of her friends. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her shoulders. They were all going to die in this place, unless one of them was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. But how could she choose? How could she condemn someone to death when they had all been equally trapped? The answer came to her in a flash. It was the only way. She had to break the curse, no matter the cost. Everyone listen to me, Lara said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. We're all trapped in this hell because of the bloodline, because of the sins committed by the Green family. We all carry that curse with us. Zane stepped forward, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. What are you saying? Lara took a deep breath. One of us has to give their life. But I don't think we're the ones to blame. I think it's someone else. Someone who isn't here. Someone who's been watching us. Someone who has been manipulating us all along. The group fell silent as Lara's words sank in. The realization was slow, but it was unmistakable. The curse wasn't just about them. It was about something darker, something more sinister that had been pulling the strings all along. The stranger. As if on cue, a door creaked open in the distance. The sound was faint, barely audible, but it was enough to make them all turn toward it. In the dim light, they could just make out a figure standing in the doorway, a figure none of them recognized. The stranger was tall, cloaked in shadows, his face obscured by the darkness. But Lara felt the weight of his gaze, the coldness of it, and it sent a chill down her spine. This was no ordinary person. This was something else. Something far more dangerous. The figure stepped forward, his footsteps soft but deliberate. He didn't speak, but his presence filled the room with an oppressive sense of dread. You've been looking for the source, the stranger said, his voice cold and hollow. But you've been looking in the wrong places. Lara's breath caught in her throat. Who are you? The stranger's lips curled into a thin, wicked smile. I am the one who created the curse. I am the one who has been waiting for you. The group recoiled, their fear growing with every word he spoke. The realization hit them like a bolt of lightning. The curse hadn't been caused by the Green family alone. It had been the work of someone else, someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I was the one who brought you here, the stranger continued. And now, you must all pay the price for your curiosity. The final sacrifice. The stranger reached into his cloak, pulling out a twisted, ancient knife. The blade gleamed in the dim light, its edge razor-sharp and blood-stained. He held it up, and the room seemed to shudder in response. You've all played your part, he said, his voice cold and calculating. But only one of you will survive. The others will die, and the curse will be passed on. Forever. The group stood frozen, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew there was no way out now. The stranger had orchestrated everything from the beginning. They were mere pawns in his twisted game. Lara turned to face her friends, her voice trembling with emotion. We don't have a choice anymore. We have to make the sacrifice. One of us has to die, but who? The answer came too late. The figure stepped forward, raising the knife high. You've all been deceived, he sneered. None of you will survive. But one will join me. And with that, the room plunged into darkness, the knife gleaming as it descended. The final sacrifice. The darkness that enveloped the room was suffocating. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom, and the silence that followed the stranger's last words was unbearable. Lara's heart pounded against her chest as she tried to comprehend what was happening. The figure with the knife loomed in front of them, an unstoppable force of malevolent energy. Zane, his face pale and filled with terror, stepped forward, his voice shaky. You did this to us? You brought us here? You're the one behind all of this." The stranger's lips twisted into a grin that sent shivers down their spines. "Oh, how delightful. You're finally beginning to understand. Yes, I am the one who called you here. I am the one who made sure you would come to this forsaken place." Sanaa clutched the journal to her chest, her hands trembling. "Why? What do you want from us? Why us?" The stranger's eyes gleamed with dark amusement. "What I want is simple. A soul. Your souls. The curse you are all so desperate to escape is mine to control. And you, my dear children, are the final pieces of the puzzle." The weight of his words sank in like a stone in their hearts. The mansion, the journal, the mirror, it was all part of his twisted design. They had been pawns from the very beginning, manipulated into playing his game. "Why us?" Lara demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and fury. "What makes us so special?" "Nothing," the stranger said with a chuckle. "Nothing at all. You were chosen simply because you were weak, because you were searching for something you didn't understand. You were desperate, just like everyone before you. And now, you will die just like the rest." His eyes flicked over them, sizing them up. "But I am not heartless. I will give you a choice." The group stared at him, unable to believe what they were hearing. A choice? After everything that had happened, after everything they had endured, now they were being offered a choice? What choice? Zane's voice was a mixture of skepticism and dread. The stranger took a step back, the shadows seeming to swallow him whole. "One of you must make the ultimate sacrifice. Only one of you will survive. The rest will perish. You can't escape the curse. It will continue to haunt you, torment you. But if one of you dies willingly, if one of you offers their life to me, the rest of you will be free." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. It felt as though the very walls of the mansion were closing in on them, squeezing the breath from their lungs. I can't choose," Lara whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't decide who deserves to die. We're all in this together. We should all fight to survive." The stranger chuckled darkly. "You misunderstand. It is not about who deserves to live or die. It's about breaking the curse. One life, one soul, and the rest will be free." The room grew colder still. The mansion groaned as though it were alive, shaking with anticipation. The strange energy that had been building up for so long now reached its peak, and the very air seemed to crackle with power. The descent into madness. The group's minds raced, each of them wrestling with the impossible decision before them. They had come to this mansion seeking answers, but now they were faced with a horrifying truth. They were trapped in a twisted game with no way out. Lara felt her knees go weak as the weight of the decision pressed down on her. She wanted to scream, to fight, to find another way. But deep down, she knew there was no other choice. The curse demanded blood. And now, one of them would have to pay the price. "Please," Sanaa whispered, her voice trembling with fear. We can't choose. I don't want to die. None of us do." "I won't let this happen," Zane said, his voice filled with resolve. "We'll find another way. There has to be another way." But the stranger simply shook his head. "There is no other way. You've been given a choice. The curse will be lifted, but only at a cost. One life for the rest." Lara turned to her friends, her heart aching. They were all in this together, but how could she decide who would be the one to die? How could anyone make that choice? "Think about it," the stranger taunted, his voice low and menacing. "You've all been brought here because of your own weaknesses. Each of you carries a burden, a sin, a guilt that has led you to this point. One of you must atone for it. One of you must die to set the rest free." Lara's mind spun. She thought about Zane, about his determination, his unwavering belief that they could escape this nightmare. She thought about Sanaa, who had stayed silent for so long, hiding something in her heart. She thought about Nazhit, who had been the first to uncover the truth about the mansion. They had all been so different, yet they had all shared one thing, a dark past that had brought them to this cursed place. But there was something else, something even darker. "Wait," Lara said, her voice barely a whisper. "What if it's not one of us? What if the bloodline isn't any of us? What if the curse isn't about us, but about something else entirely?" The stranger's grin widened. "Ah, the clever girl. You're right. The curse isn't about you. It's about me. And now you must make your choice. Who will die? Who will live? The group stood frozen, their minds swirling with terror and confusion. The weight of the decision was unbearable. None of them could make the choice. None of them could decide who deserved to die. But there was one thing they could do. The sacrifice. Without warning, Lara stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had made her decision. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I'll be the one to die." The group gasped in shock. Zane took a step toward her, his face a mask of disbelief. "No. Lara, you can't. We can't let you do this." But Lara's mind was made up. "It's the only way. The curse needs one life to break free. And I can't let you all suffer because of me." The stranger's grin stretched even wider, and for a moment, Lara thought she saw something resembling approval in his eyes. "You've made the right choice," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Now the rest of you will be free." Lara closed her eyes, preparing herself for the inevitable. She felt the cold blade of the knife against her skin, its touch icy and sharp. She braced for the pain, for the final sacrifice that would end the curse. But then, just as the stranger's knife descended, a sudden, deafening roar filled the air. The walls of the mansion trembled, and the ground beneath them shook violently. "No," the stranger hissed, his voice full of rage. "You think you can escape me?" The mansion groaned in protest, and the shadows that had once seemed so oppressive began to twist and writhe, as if something inside them was trying to break free. The final confrontation. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air grew thick with an oppressive, suffocating energy. The mansion moaned as if it were alive, every inch of the structure groaning in agony. The darkness that had once been their prison now seemed to fight against them, writhing and twisting as though it were trying to consume them whole. Lara opened her eyes, the blinding pain of the sacrifice still fresh in her mind. She could feel the cold steel of the knife pressing against her skin, but the moment it was about to cut, something had changed. The air had shifted, as if the mansion itself was rejecting the stranger's command. The stranger's face twisted into a snarl of pure rage. "No, no one escapes. This is my domain." He lunged at Lara, but before he could reach her, a sudden blast of blinding light erupted from the center of the room, throwing everyone backward. The force of the light was like nothing they had ever felt before. It wasn't just light, it was power, raw and untamed, breaking through the veil of darkness that had once held them captive. The mansion quivered again, its walls shaking with the intensity of the energy flooding the room. The stranger's figure flickered, as though he were fading in and out of existence, his power weakening. "What is this?" the stranger spat, his voice hoarse. "How is this possible?" The group struggled to their feet, their eyes wide with shock and confusion. The light continued to pulse, its radiance growing with each passing second. It was as if the mansion itself was rejecting the curse, attempting to cleanse itself of the dark force that had taken hold of it. Zane, his breath coming in ragged gasps, looked around in disbelief. What's happening? Is this the end?" But before anyone could answer, a deep, rumbling voice filled the room, its tone both ancient and powerful. "The time has come." The voice seemed to come from every corner of the mansion, echoing in their ears. The walls groaned in response, as though acknowledging the command. The light intensified, blinding them all. Lara squinted against the harsh glare, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is that? Who's speaking?" The stranger's eyes widened with terror. "No, it can't be. You have no power here." But the voice only grew louder, more insistent. "I have power over this place. And you, Dark One, have no place here any longer." The figure of the stranger flickered once more, and then, with a final scream of rage, he dissolved into the shadows, his body vanishing into the darkness as though it had never existed. The light continued to pulse, its energy overwhelming everything in its path. The mansion shuddered as though it were being torn apart from the inside. Lara, Zane, and the others stood frozen, watching in awe and fear as the light began to recede, slowly dissipating as if it were being drawn back into the earth. "What just happened?" Sanaa gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think we're free," Lara said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "The curse, it's gone." Zane looked around, his expression one of cautious hope. "But what about the mansion? Is it over?" The mansion groaned one final time, the sound echoing like a dying breath. The darkness that had once filled every inch of the place began to fade, replaced by a strange calmness. The oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long began to lift, and for the first time since they had entered, the air seemed to feel lighter, freer. But just as the silence began to settle over them, a sudden crash echoed from upstairs, followed by a blood-curdling scream. The unfinished business. The group turned toward the source of the scream, their hearts racing. The moment of victory had been short-lived. The mansion was far from being completely freed from its evil grip. Lara's blood ran cold. "What was that?" "We need to go check," Zane said, his voice firm. Now, without hesitation, they began to climb the staircase that led to the upper floors. As they reached the top, the air grew heavier once more, thick with an unnatural coldness. The walls were cracked, the wallpaper peeling away like layers of old skin. The house seemed to be deteriorating, but the malevolent force that had once pervaded it hadn't disappeared entirely. There was something else, something dark that still lingered in the shadows. They walked down the narrow corridor, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Every door they passed seemed to groan, as though protesting their presence. But when they reached the final door at the end of the hall, the air seemed to freeze, as if the very mansion itself was holding its breath. Lara reached for the door handle, her hand shaking. "Please, don't let this be another trap." She opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. The sight that met them inside was nothing short of horrifying. The final sacrifice. In the center of the room, a figure stood, its back turned to them. It was tall, its features obscured by a flowing cloak of black. But as they stepped closer, the figure slowly turned around, revealing the face of someone they all knew. It was Nazhit, but something was horribly wrong. Nashit's eyes were wide, bloodshot, and empty, devoid of any life. His mouth was open in a silent scream, his body twitching unnaturally. The air around him seemed to warp, as though reality itself was bending and twisting in his presence. Zane stumbled back, his face a mask of disbelief. "No, Nazhit, what happened to you?" Lara felt her heart stop as she recognized the truth. The curse hadn't been lifted. It had merely changed form. The dark force that had been banished was now inhabiting Nashit's body, using him as a vessel to manifest itself once more. The curse wasn't over. It had simply been transferred. "No," Sanaa whispered, her voice breaking. "We're too late." The figure of Nazhit smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was the smile of something ancient, something malevolent. "You thought you could escape me. But you're wrong. You can never escape." The shadows around them deepened, and the air grew colder, the temperature dropping to near freezing. The mansion began to shake once more, the walls cracking and splintering as though they were about to collapse entirely. "Get back!" Zane shouted, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to stop this now." But it was too late. Nashit's body contorted violently, and in that moment, something broke free. A monstrous shape, shadowy and formless, emerged from his body, its presence overwhelming and suffocating. It was the true face of the curse, the one they had all feared, the one that had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. It was too powerful, too strong. The curse had won. The final escape. Thea crackled with an unnatural energy, a palpable sense of dread that weighed on their chests, making it hard to breathe. The monstrosity that had emerged from Nashit's body towered before them, its form shifting and writhing, as if it were a living nightmare, not bound by the laws of nature. It pulsed with malevolent intent, and its presence seemed to stretch across every corner of the mansion, suffocating any hope that remained. Zane's heart raced, his blood pumping like fire through his veins as he instinctively pulled Lara and Sanaa behind him. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. His eyes darted around the room, seeking any possible means of escape. But there was nothing. The door behind them slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside the room with the creature. The shadowy figure loomed over them, its eyes burning with an otherworldly glow, flickering like the embers of a dying fire. It spoke with a voice that echoed in their minds, cold and ancient. "You cannot escape. The mansion belongs to me, and so do you." Lara's legs trembled beneath her as she backed away, her mind racing. She had thought the curse had been broken, that they had won. But this was far beyond anything they had anticipated. The curse hadn't been lifted. It had only changed, evolved, become something more insidious. "How do we stop this?" Lara cried out, her voice desperate. "We can't fight this thing. It's too powerful." Zane's fists clenched, his knuckles white. "We're not fighting it. We're running." But even as he said the words, he knew it wasn't that simple. The creature's influence had already spread through the mansion, and every inch of the house seemed to be alive with its dark energy. No matter where they ran, the creature would be able to follow, closing in on them until there was nowhere left to hide. It was then that Lara remembered something the old man in the village had told her. The key to the curse, the final piece of the puzzle. It's in the heart of the mansion. The words echoed in her mind as if they were a beacon of hope, but they were also a warning. The heart of the mansion was where the darkness had taken root. The place where the curse had begun. The place that now held the creature's true power. "We need to get to the heart of the mansion," Lara said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "That's where we'll end this." Zayn and Sanaa exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with uncertainty. "Are you sure?" Zayn asked. "We've already seen what this thing is capable of. How are we supposed to get close to it?" But Lara's gaze was unwavering. "It's the only way. If we can destroy the heart, the curse will die with it." The creature's laugh was a deep, hollow sound, like the wind howling through an empty graveyard. "You think you can destroy me? I am eternal. I am the darkness that binds this place. You cannot kill what does not die." Lara's heart sank as the creature's words filled the room, but she didn't give up. They couldn't afford to. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. "We'll see about that," Zayn muttered, determination settling over his features. Without another word, they turned and sprinted toward the door, desperate to escape the creature's reach. But as they ran, the walls seemed to close in around them, the mansion shifting, warping, bending under the influence of the curse. Every hallway seemed to stretch on forever, every turn leading them deeper into the darkness. They had no idea where they were going. The mansion was alive, a labyrinth of shifting walls and endless corridors, and they were trapped within it. But they pressed on, following their instincts, hoping they were moving toward the heart of the mansion. Suddenly, the air around them grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly, until their breath was visible in the frozen air. The ground beneath their feet rumbled, and the walls cracked as though the mansion itself were in the throes of death. "We're getting close," Lara whispered, her voice tight with fear. And then they saw it. At the end of the hallway, there was a door. It was different from the others. Ancient, covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. It was the heart of the mansion, the source of the curse, the place where it all began. Lara stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for the door. But just as her fingers brushed the cold wood, the creature's voice filled the air once more. "Do you really think you can stop me?" it hissed. "This place is mine. You cannot destroy me." But Lara didn't hesitate. She turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. Inside the heart, the room beyond the door was unlike anything they had seen before. It was vast, with walls that stretched up into darkness. In the center of the room, there was an altar, a large stone slab, covered in ancient runes and symbols. And at the base of the altar was a glowing, pulsating heart. It throbbed with a sickly, unnatural light, its beat echoing through the room like a living thing. The creature's form materialized in the doorway, its tendrils of shadow curling around the edges of the room. "This is it," it whispered, its voice low and menacing. "The heart of the curse. You cannot destroy it. It is beyond your power." But Lara knew what she had to do. She had seen it in her mind, the key to ending it all. With a deep breath, she stepped forward and approached the altar. The heart's glow intensified as she got closer, its pulse quickening, as if it sensed her presence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the knife that had been passed down to her by the old man. It was the same knife that had once been used to summon the curse, the key to its power. Lara raised the knife, her hand steady despite the overwhelming fear that gripped her heart. She knew what she had to do. She had to pierce the heart, destroy it, and with it, the curse that had plagued them all. As she plunged the knife into the glowing heart, a scream tore through the air. It wasn't the scream of a person. It was the scream of something ancient, something that had never been meant to die. The room shook, and the walls trembled as the darkness around them began to fade. The heart's light flickered and dimmed, its pulse slowing as the curse unraveled. And then, with one final, deafening crash, everything went silent. The aftermath. The group stood in the silence that followed, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. The heart lay still, its once pulsing light now dim and lifeless. The mansion, too, seemed to have quieted, as if the very spirit of the house had been extinguished. But they knew it wasn't over yet. Not until they were safely out. They turned and left the room, making their way back toward the exit. As they passed through the corridors, the mansion's oppressive weight seemed to lift, the darkness receding into nothingness. The walls, once cracked and decayed, were now slowly repairing themselves, as though the house were healing. Finally, they reached the front door. Lara's heart pounded as she pushed it open, stepping out into the cold night air. They were free. The curse was broken. The mansion was no longer their prison. As they walked away from the ruins of the house, they couldn't help but look back. The mansion stood silent in the distance, its broken windows reflecting the fading light of the moon. But they knew deep down that the darkness was gone. The mansion, once a place of terror, was now just another abandoned structure, waiting to be forgotten.